Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's Inspiring Leadership podcast. I've already had a ball with Emma Henderson MBE. We've been chatting about everything from the charity work that she's done, a lot of experience in Project Wingman Foundation, also about her husband, who is a wing commander in the Royal Air Force. We've been talking about her time flying as a pilot with EasyJet and the amazing thing that Project Wingman did, getting 6,500 crew helping the NHS staff during the COVID. So lots of stuff that we can talk about. But Emma, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan. I agree. It's been a fantastic conversation already.
Yeah. And you and my wife got on like a house on fire, and you're going to come and speak at the Ride to Inspire.
That would be a real pleasure, yeah.
Velodrome in London on the, it's going to be the 10th of July. So come along, everybody, and listen to Emma speak. But Emma, you have written a book, which is just behind you for those who can see on YouTube, called Grounded. Grounded with Emma Henderson MBE. And also Grounded Leadership is your sort of philosophy, your approach, because we do live in very turbulent times. And I think from flight deck to boardroom, navigating turbulence is one of your themes. Tell us about Grounded Leadership.
Well, it was born out of the book, really, because I wrote the book last year. I published the book last year. I wrote it in sort of between 2020 and 22. And it was Grounded Leadership came from that, because lots of people talk about leadership, and that's great. But you need to, when you become a speaker, you need to make your mark and you need to have your niche area. And actually, it just was a perfect fit for what it was a perfect name for what I was already talking about. So, Grounded Leadership has compass points of humanity, humility, and humor. And as you said, we live in very turbulent times now, more so than we have done for perhaps 100 years. We've also got a situation where everything's being run for us by AI and automation. And actually, they're great tools. They make our lives easier, but they do remove the human from the process. And we have to remember that every transaction we make still involves a person at some point. So Grounded Leadership is really centered on keeping people at the center of everything we do, which actually saves businesses money, because if you're not losing people all the time, it means you're not having to recruit them all the time and then train them up. If you think about how much money it costs to train somebody from scratch, if you lose people because you're not the kind of person that they want to carry on working for, then that's costing your business money. But actually, when it's really easy, isn't it, to lead when things are going well, when things are stable, when life is good, we're making money and everything's going as we want it to be. But actually, how we show up as leaders when turbulence hits, that is the true mark of what makes a good leader. And when you throw humility into that and remember that a rising tide lifts all boats. So somebody in your team succeeds at something, that is their win. And we share each other's wins. We raise each other up, rather than taking all the glory for ourselves. And I think also a good leader takes the pain as well. So, I think it's really important that the buck stops with you as a leader, and you make sure your people know that, that you make sure your people know that you've got their back. And, you already, you've met me and spoken to me before already, Jonathan. So, that humor is a big part of my everyday life. For me, a day that we haven't laughed is a complete waste of a day. So, and I think, humor is a really good way of diffusing a tricky situation quite a lot of the time.
Yeah. And it was so interesting that when we first chatted to each other a month or so ago and had our sort of warm up, get to know each other, I shared with you something that Professor Roger Sir, a friend of mine, shared with me about 10 years ago about the three hums: humanity, humility, and humor. And you go, that's exactly what I talk about. And I go, hey, like this is serendipity. This is what an amazing coincidence. And people get excited about coincidence. They go, hey, how did that happen? It's a coincidence. Yeah, well, coincidence means the coming together of two people. It's supposed to happen. And
coincidence, exactly.
Yeah, coincidence. It's a bit like people get a bit confused that you fire a missile and it explodes near the aircraft. You go, yeah, that was supposed to happen. It just sends bits of shrapnel into it. You don't actually have to hit it. It would be called a hit-ile if it was a hit-ile. It's actually called a missile. It misses and it blows up. People didn't quite get that one. But it is very interesting how in these times where everybody is sort of questioning what's going on with politics and leaders, particularly CEOs, are bowing the knee to authoritarian leadership and not wanting to speak out because it might affect their business, or their university might be closed down, or a law firm might not get any more contracts because they've stood up to who the authoritarian is, to actually, in those times, rather than just whinge about things, to actually say grounded leadership, or in my case, inspiring leadership, and there's many overlaps. This is what we are talking about. This is what we want. We don't want this. We want this. And we do need safety. We do need psychological safety. We do need a world where there isn't fear of retribution or what might happen to you, or that you may end up in a Honduran prison or whatever it might be, El Salvador in prison. Sorry. I think what you're doing is really important. Let's talk about your life story. I'm really interested in that, because let's go back to what shaped Emma Henderson into the leader you are today. And you're in great demand. You've had a very busy month racing around the country and the world, giving your speeches and being very authentic. That's the thing that strikes me. You are who you are. And I love the fact you're willing to help Lee and myself with the charity to help the victims of violence against women and girls and young people, particularly when we've been watching films like Adolescence on Netflix. This is more important than ever. So thank you for all that you do for people. Tell us your origin story, because it's a really interesting one.
Well, I grew up in rural Essex. Dad's a minister in the United Reformed Church, but also his main job was as a Lloyd's broker. He still does that. Mum's a teacher, or was. They're literally on their way to Australia as I speak. I dropped them off this afternoon to go and see my brother. And I grew up with in a very privileged, I suppose, background. We didn't actually have a lot of money growing up, but it was still a very privileged background, because I grew up with two parents who love each other and still married to each other. And, nobody got divorced in our family. There was never any, I'm sure there were lots of fights between me and my brother, just as there should be. We used to have foot fights on the sofa, but we grew up in a very safe environment, and grew up with a lot of friends around us as well. And I didn't know what I was going to be. But when I was 10, my parents took us to see the space shuttle come into Stansted, and I decided I was going to be an astronaut. But the problem with that was that I thought I had to be American. And it's so funny when I say this to a live audience. Everything I knew about the world, if you think back to 1983, everything we knew about the world fitted into a book about that thick. And it was called The Encyclopedia of the World. And it had everything from cavemen to spaceflight in it. So, without going down to the library and looking up on a microfiche how I might become an astronaut, I had no way of finding that out. So we didn't have access to the sort of information that we can, get in seconds now. So my kind of course was really that I decided I was going to go on and be a lawyer. I went to university to study history, and then with a view to doing a 2-year law conversion. But I'd had a flying lesson at 18, which I had loved. And really, when I went to university, I discovered the University Air Squadron, and I joined that, decided I was going to be a Harrier pilot, and ended up marrying the Air Force rather than joining it. I decided not to join it because my husband was posted to RAF Kinloss in the north of Scotland, and I would have started off my Air Force career at Cranwell, and that we probably would have spent the first 3 years of married life not living together, and I didn't see the point of doing that. So I stuck to my guns, went for the boy, and we are still married 30 years later. So it was a good
Congratulations.
Thank you. I remind him what a lucky man he is all the time. Poor thing. But and so really, when I got married and moved up here, I didn't think I'd ever fly again, because I was a graduate living in an employment black spot with an English accent and an Air Force address, and there wasn't any work. So it wasn't really until I had some sort of office roles, secretarial type stuff, and that was really good for me, because that taught me that actually it's really important. The jobs that you see as being at the bottom of the pile are the really important jobs that keep the business running. So that was actually good training looking back. But we moved to New Zealand, and my husband said to me, why don't you start flying again? So I did, and we had 3.5 years out there, and I came back as a fully qualified commercial pilot.
Wow.
And then instructed for 3 years, went to EasyJet, spent 12 years there, and I would still be there for now if it hadn't been for COVID bringing the world to a halt and bringing my world to a halt. And I was living up here on the Murray Firth in the north of Scotland, working at Gatwick and commuting by air, and the flights all stopped. So the maths didn't work anymore. And while I was sitting on the ground here, although I was working 18-hour days on the charity, which we'll come to in a minute, I had this epiphany, really. I thought, oh, it's possible to sleep normally, And I'd had all this time flying around Europe, which I had absolutely loved. It was my dream job. I still love EasyJet as an airline. I was considered to be a good leaver. I didn't throw a hissy fit and leave. I just realised that time had been called on my days in an Airbus for now. And, that really, then I focused on the charity, which was fantastic. And that is what changed the course of my life.
And just, I wanted to add into the story, and I do want more in a minute. I was just thinking, as you said there, that, COVID sort of ended everything. You were grounded essentially, and you chose to be a good leaver. But I was occasionally I go down, do some work in Germany. And so therefore I fly from London City. So I go from here down there. And I found a nice company here in Grantham that take me down in a comfortable car. And the guy was driving me, and I asked him his origin story. It turned out he was been an RAF pilot. Then he'd done his commercial license and he'd become a commercial pilot. But then COVID came, and there he was driving me in this limousine. And I thought, this is really bizarre. Would you like to get back to commercial? It's just a bit too late now, really. And there's just they do need people, but I've just moved on, and I have more of a quality of life, and I get some sleep. It seemed like, I think, just very interested when we get into the health bit, but maybe you might want to mention it now. There is this research, and I don't know how true it is or whether you've come across it, which particularly if you're doing long haul flights, the disturbance to your biorhythms and your sleep patterns is really bad and carcinogenic for people who are in the airline industry. More of you get cancer problems because of these time zones and everything that's going on and poor sleep. Is this true, or is this just a legend?
I don't think it's limited to airline pilots. It's shift work.
No, it's shift work. It is shift work.
It's shift work, because if you interrupt your circadian rhythm, as you do, so even if you're short haul European like EasyJet is, and you come home every night, if you're coming home at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're still home, but actually you should have been asleep for the last at least 4 hours. So there's definitely damage that's done to your body that you can't. I mean, you can undo it. You can't undo the damage you do to your body by sitting down there for 12 hours a day. And we know that from office workers being told to stand up every few minutes, and people with Apple Watches having a buzzing sound telling them they've got to move around because they haven't moved for the last half hour, whatever. So we know we need to move around more, but it's more the interruption generally to your circadian rhythm. But there are various different ways of dealing with jet lag that I know long haul friends have different methods, and one of them is to have breakfast at the same time as you would do if you were at home. So a friend who works for Air New Zealand, who considered themselves to be the only ultra long haul airline in the world, he used to do LA London and back, and it was an 11-day trip. So he would just keep his watch on New Zealand time, and he would eat his breakfast at the same time as he would do, and it helped him to stay in some sort of Kiwi pattern. But I don't know if there's higher levels of cancer in aviation. Certainly in the Air Force, we've lost more friends to cancer than anything else, which is bizarre. But is that also because we're now in our 50s and that's when these things happen more to people?
It's sort of only later on, when the research is finally done, that it comes. So I had a very impressive individual who was sharing his story about rugby. Was his big thing, Matt Gallagher. And he was a professional rugby player. But he's now probably got a year left to live. He's got motor neurons disease, and motor neurons disease hits rugby players 5 times more than the general population. They haven't quite worked out whether it's the blows to the body and the concussion and all that goes on. Apparently, boxers don't get it, but the rugby players do.
That's
and so I think, So sometimes when the research will come out, they'll know more about it. But I'm pleased that you now have, with your speaking circuit, you've now got it. But do tell us about Project Wingman and how you started that up, because that was fascinating.
I look back and I wonder myself how that all came about, to be honest with you. I landed from Luxembourg on the 16th of March, 2020. All our passengers got off the aircraft and said good luck instead of goodbye. And I didn't know that as I left the aircraft that night, I sort of, you always turn around and make sure you haven't left the strobes on or something, which is my trademark. And I didn't know, as I look back at that aircraft and walked across the pan to the terminal building, that was the last flight I was ever going to operate commercially for EasyJet, because I went home the next day on silent roads and empty planes and trains, got back to the Highlands, and it was like nothing was going on. London shut down and Scotland was still running. It didn't reach us for a few extra weeks. And I never went back to EasyJet. I never went back to Gatwick. I never went back to EasyJet. I never went back to flying an Airbus. I didn't know that was going to happen, but I could sense as I was coming into land that night, I can vividly remember coming into land at Gatwick and thinking, this is massive. What is happening is absolutely massive. And I'm a history graduate, and I studied, my specialisation was the Second World War. And I can remember seeing maps, animated maps of Hitler's influence over Europe. And it was like this black ink spreading across Europe. And that's what it felt like was happening to the world. It felt like this sort of darkness was spreading across the world. And I just thought, this is going to be massive. People were talking about being grounded for a couple of weeks. And I thought, you don't ground whole fleets of aircraft for a couple of weeks. That is a big deal. And I just had this sense that whatever was coming next was going to be catastrophic. Mm-hmm. But I also knew that we had a huge number of people who were about to be very readily available and had skills that were going to be useful to the NHS, which we were being told was about to face its biggest challenge yet, which of course it then did, because nobody trained to deal with death in the volumes that people dealt with. And I think we've forgotten that about 2020 very quickly. Those of us who weren't in the NHS at the time have forgotten how horrific it was to be in an ITU and just losing not just a person. Yes, it's awful to lose one person. To lose 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 people in a night, it was just horrific. But I knew that we had an ability we couldn't take that away from people. We couldn't make it any better, or at least we couldn't change it. But we could sit down by people's sides and say, you're not on your own going through this. We hear you, we see you, we value you, we're grateful for you being here. And that meant a lot to people. So the initial idea was tea and empathy. Literally that, just go into a hospital and set up a lounge. Effectively, we decided to model it on airport lounges. And our ask of the hospital was, give us a room that's big enough to practice social distancing, and we will come in and serve your people like we would do on an aircraft. So we didn't know or care whether people were the hospital porter or a consultant anaesthetist. As far as we were concerned, everybody mattered. And we didn't know what people's jobs were when they came into the lounge. So we welcomed them all as we would do on board an aircraft, and just said, welcome, come in, sit down. We will bring you a cup of tea. And that was the magic, because NHS staff live to serve other people. So we were saying to them, no, we will serve you. And you know yourself that a cup of tea that's made by someone else always tastes so much better than the one you've made for yourself, doesn't it? So, that's where it started. And it was really just listening to people coming in and saying, when are we going to be flying again? Don't know. Well, my father's just died. He's, in South Africa. I don't know when I'm going to get home to see my family. It was an incident that happened. And we couldn't change that. We couldn't make the pain go away, but we could sit down next to that person and be by their side while they processed the information that they'd just been given. And there were numerous accounts of that. So many, actually, that book 2 is going to be about the Wingman story, because I think it's really, I don't want to harp on about COVID, but I think it's really important that we remember how people step up when times get really tough, how much people are willing to give to other people, how we're all willing to look after each other. It's the main compass point of grounded leadership, is humanity is still alive and kicking. Thank goodness.
And I just researched for you that as at January 2025, do you know how many died of COVID in the UK? How many would you guess?
I don't know, but I remember hearing recently a number that was astronomically more than I thought it was.
What do you think it is? I'm not trying to catch you out. I'm just interested.
30,000.
How many?
30,000.
232,112 people have died of COVID in the UK. 232,112, and we must remember the 112, because everyone, even that, everybody counts.
Yeah.
But that number of deaths, and in America, it was in the million.
Absolutely, yeah.
And people don't understand just what an impact it was.
I think we're quick to forget. And I think, it's that blitz mentality that our grandparents had, is that we don't focus on the death. We focus on the hope that we can gain from it. And I think that we are programmed as a species not to dwell on, if we remembered the horror all the time, we'd never do anything.
Yeah.
Which is why we have more than one baby, isn't it?
Correct. Well, I mean, if you want even bigger shock number, 1.19 million people died in America because they were told to drink bleach and that everything would be fine and don't worry about it. And now we'll make you president. Now you've been so clever and you know so much about COVID. How about becoming the president? 1.19 million people.
It's a lot of people, isn't it? I don't think none of us can actually imagine what 232,112 people looks like, because we don't know that many people.
No.
All you need to do to try and work it out is to Google the population of your local town. It will almost certainly be smaller than, by a long way, than that number.
And you probably remember the story of the starfish. Yeah, story of the starfish. Okay, you're walking along a beach in one of your tropical holidays, and there are starfish washing up the beach, and they are dying in the sun. And you see this little old lady coming along the beach, and she's doing something. You can't quite work out what she's doing. And as you get closer, you see her pick up a starfish and throw it back in the sea. And you go, "What are you doing?" And she goes, "I'm saving the starfish." She said, "But there's thousands. They're all drying out and dying." She said, "But I made a difference to that one."
Yeah.
And that's,
as you started to tell it, I remembered it, and I thought that that's what Project Wingman was.
You made a difference. You made a difference.
We made a difference to that one.
Yeah,
and that's what that's one of the things that I talk about a lot, is that there's so much that's out of our control. We live in such a challenging world. Whether or not you agree with the politics, and whether it's politics you find challenging, or whether it's automation and AI you find challenging, or whether it's something more local to you than that. Life is difficult for a lot of people at the moment, and we can't control an awful lot of that. So one of the things we always talk about in aviation is control the controllables. I can't control who's in charge of a country, but I can make a difference to my corner of the world. So if I say this is how I think everybody should behave, and then I don't behave like that at home, that's ridiculous. Yeah. It's not even not being authentic. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it is so true. And that's, as you know, a Stoic philosophy. And I'm a big fan of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. And this idea, it's not the event that happens to you, it's your perception about the event, and then how you respond based on your perception of the event. Someone might say, "Well, that looks a bit messy." Do I get offended? If I think he's insulting me, then I take offense about that, and I think badly about it, and I'm angry with him and whatever it might be. But his comment is a neutral comment, neither good nor bad. He just made a comment, but it's my perception about it. And I think, I do think, and we discussed this beforehand, that we do need to take a stand and stand for what, if as we said before, if good people remain quiet, then that's a real problem in society. You become a bystander, you're condoning it, you're not doing anything about it. But at the same time, what can you do wherever you are? And you did something about this with that 6,500 crew. And of course, you're going to come and help Lee with the Inspiring Leadership Foundation, where she's helping the victims of violence against women and girls. And I remember a couple of the girls who spoke at some of the events where their lives had been transformed. In one case, Lee had been the mentor to this lady, and she'd been through awful abuse and sexual abuse in detail, which I won't go into. But the point was her life had been transformed because she believed that there was now something she could do, and she was going on to nursing, just like your theme, and she was going to university, and she never would have done that beforehand. So I do think that the concept of starfish, when people go, "What can I do? I'm just one person." But all the big events have been done by small groups of determined men and women, haven't they? That's the famous quote. Let's talk about the amazing things you've done with your life. But what's a dark moment of your life, and what did you learn from it, Emma, which has really helped you in your leadership at the moment?
Well, I think the two challenging moments really, but they kind of one led into the other. And the first was an illness that I had that tried to kill me and failed. So that showed that. And that was an autoimmune triggered neurological illness. And it wasn't something that nobody really knows where it came from. And it's a very unusual thing to have happened. And the happy coincidence with that is that there was a cure for it.
Wow.
So I lost my medical for 6 months. I was at the beginning of my command process and found myself without a medical. And I knew I was ill because I didn't care that I couldn't fly. And if you don't care, once you fly, you always care if you're not flying. So in the moments when you don't care, you know that something really bad has happened. And I had 6 months. I probably had 7 or 8 months of being ill, but it was probably 3 or 4 months before I realised I was ill and went and did something about it. And that I got my medical back. I don't think I really realised how serious that was until afterwards, when the neurologist said to me, "I thought you were about 3 days away from dying." So that's why I went into hospital. And actually, his story is kind of part of the Project Wingman story, because he was based at Frimley Park Hospital, which is where I had this treatment, which saved my life. And we opened a lounge there, and I was able to contact him and say, "I just want you to know that this is partly my way of saying thank you to you." And I'm especially grateful that I was able to thank him and the GP who referred me to him, because she's since moved down to Cornwall and I would have no way of finding her now. But he's since died. So I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to say thank you for saving my life.
Wow.
And that was pretty amazing. But then I went back to work and went back into the command process too quickly. And I failed my first attempt at becoming a captain. And I talk about it all the time. Not because I'm trying to glorify, aren't I great? I failed. I just think we need to get comfortable with the uncomfortable feeling of failing. Because if we don't get comfortable with that, we will never try. And, nobody remembers it. Nobody thinks of me now as, oh, she's that captain who failed her command course. Nobody thinks that. So actually, failing command is something, particularly in an industry that's as male dominated as aviation. Nobody wants to talk about failure because it's seen as a sign of weakness. But I challenge that and flip it on its head and say it's a sign of strength. It's a stepping stone to success.
It's really interesting you say that. I was with a CEO the other day, and we're preparing for an offsite. And so myself and a colleague, Karen, were interviewing him as we're interviewing all the executive. And I asked him 10 words, 3 phrases. I said, how often do you and your executive use these 10 words, 3 phrases? 1, I was wrong. 2, I don't know. And 3, I need some help. And he goes, do you know what? It's a real problem. We don't use those words. And of course, politicians who are famous in the newspapers at the moment, they would never use those words.
And also arguably husbands, Jonathan, just putting one out there for...
I'm afraid so, yeah. What do you mean? What do you mean me? Yeah, I'm perfect. And this is actually what a friend of mine who's a female executive search consultant, she goes, it's so frustrating. The females who are going for certain jobs, they go, well, I've got 95% of the skills, but I haven't quite got all of them yet. I'm probably not the right person. The bloke go, oh, I've got 50% of that. Yeah, I can do it. Bring it on. I'll do it. No problem. And just lots of blagging and just making it up as you go along. But I do think you're really onto something very interesting, this idea of failure, learning from failure. And I often encourage my leaders to write the alternative CV. I'd like your CV, please, but the other one. What do you mean the other one? The one of all your failures.
Yeah.
And what you learned from those failures. So, for example, I have got so many failures. It goes into about 5 sheets. But one of the bits was when I was in the army and I just finished staff college. I thought I was going to be, came out in the top 10%. I thought I was God's gift. But I didn't get promoted to lieutenant colonel from major on the first attempt, where some of my peers did. And they went on to become lieutenant generals and run deputy supreme allied commander Europe and all this kind of stuff. Then the second year, didn't get it again. Then the third year. And I went, do you know what? Someone's telling me something. This is not my career. I'm okay at it, but I'm not going to wait till eventually one day, out of put sort of like, let's put the poor puppy down, just promote him, please, somebody, I didn't want to be a pity promotion. I wanted to be doing something that was really my calling, which is why you and I are here today. But I think I'm much more comfortable now with failure. But in my early years, I've got a lovely friend of mine who's a peer of mine, and we grew up in the army together, and I'm getting him on. Simon Hutchinson became a colonel in the army, head of the Royal Signals, and he also was the CEO of the Goldsmiths Company, which is one of our livery companies we're both in. And he went, Jonathan, I don't think I should be on the podcast. I said, what do you mean? I said, you're a very inspiring leader. Because, Jonathan, as an early leader, I was awful. I was really not good. I said, hey, me too. I was terrible as a leader to begin with. I made so many mistakes. Let's talk about that.
I think that's the point, isn't it? None of us, I wasn't born as a captain.
No,
you learn how to become a captain. You learn how to become a leader. And yes, I think there is an innate leadership quality in people that you see. Yeah, you can see it in children from a young age. That doesn't mean that you can't learn it, however. No. And you don't start off in life as the CEO of a FTSE 100 company. You start off at the bottom, learning your craft.
And that's something very interesting, that you were in an organization like flying where you have to be trained. You can't go like, Emma, here you are, EasyJet aircraft, just make yourself at home, play with a few buttons and take off. You spend hours and days and weeks and months training, years. And then you eventually are allowed to the next bit. But then there's another stage. And your husband, with his time up at Lossiemouth, there's so many, whenever I had a pilot, even more than in the army days. But then I talked to a CEO. I go, so you became CEO? Great. What training did you have to become the CEO?
Yeah.
And he goes, none. I got promoted and I get paid a lot more and I have a lot more responsibilities. But I said, what have you been with a whole group of peers and talked to them about what they did in their different businesses? No, don't do that. And then I go, okay, well, look, let's do a leadership development program and it's going to be this price. They go, ooh, that's a lot of money. I said, do you know how much they spent on developing me? It's about 300 to 500,000 pounds. How much have they spent on you? Oh, I don't know. They spend $5,000. That seemed like a lot of money. And so there's this distortion that they go, here, run this big thing, have this airplane, and we're not going to train you. And let's see how well you get on. It's almost amazing they don't crash their companies. Well, some of them do.
Well, I think that's a really interesting thing. I think having spent all of my life from when I was 20 when I joined the University Air Squadron. So for the last 32 years, I've been around the military and around aviation. And when you leave that world and you go into the corporate world, as I do now as a professional speaker, I'm delivering keynotes on stages to people who are just saying, this is groundbreaking stuff. And I'm like, no, this is basics. Why do you not know this? And actually, in the corporate world, that's exactly what happens. If you stay somewhere for long enough, you get promoted and you become the next biggest boss and then the next biggest boss. And, as long as you do your job well and you don't bring the company to its knees, you carry on getting promoted until you find yourself in a position that people feel ill-equipped for. And it's interesting what you say about women not necessarily wanting to put themselves forward for a role if they've only got 95% of the skills. And, I think I'm more man in that respect because I just think, I know most of that. I can work out the rest. And, that curiosity that I think is people aren't curious anymore. No. Do you not find?
It's very true.
What's behind that? I literally am looking at your screen and thinking, I wonder where the pipes run up his walls. That's how my mind works.
And it's really healthy. I think a number of words which are really a good sign of a great leader. One is, and we talked about the 10 phrases, the 10 words, 3 phrases. But the other one is, I'm curious, or I wonder. Tell me more. What else? What more? Those kind of questions are the sign of a really good leader. But what you see is too many leaders have an opinion on everything. They are a president with they're an expert in everything from geology to COVID-19. And they cannot admit that they're open to learning and they may be wrong. What if you're wrong? That's the great question for anybody in any meeting. Okay, guys, we're planning on this. We hope there's going to be no tariffs and we're doing this, but oh my God, there's a tariff. We didn't see that one coming. well, when you're doing the planning, what if we're wrong? And this is where I love the wargaming that we often do. And your husband would have done this, big board table. I've done this with civilian businesses. And everybody stands around and they go, okay, our business is this. The regulator's playing you're playing the regulator. You're playing our rival. You're playing China, because we're gonna get our product from China. You're playing South Korea. We're getting some product from you, and you're playing Vietnam. So what if this happens? And you game it through. And then what if we're all wrong?
It makes me laugh, you referring to that, because in my garage are two big boards that my husband and my son, in fact, they'll come out on Thursday night when my son comes home for Easter, and they will play war games all over the weekend because they just love. My husband's cousins are military as well, so there's a whole group of our side of the family who just love their war games. And you're right, yeah. But actually, it's whether you do it around a table as a war game or not. In aviation, there is no room for assuming you're right. You're always questioning your decisions. And that's why, we put procedures in place to make one of the things that I am asked about the most, speak about the most, is decision making at 37,000 feet. Because if you are making decisions at 600 miles an hour, 7 miles above the planet, with 180 people sitting behind you, expecting you to get that right, you need to know how to do it. So you need to have the confidence to know that you are able to find out all the facts, for example. And that's the first part of good decision making. It's a fact-finding mission. Is what has just happened what I think has just happened, or is there another part of the story? So I need to ask open-ended questions to get information, for example.
And it's so good that there's that curiosity, that wonder, that never being so arrogant. And it's like, I think I'm thinking about you flying your jet at 30,000, your jet or your Airbus at 30,000 feet. There's that really terrible joke the comedian told, and humor is part of your repertoire. But was it my grandfather died quietly in his sleep. Unlike his passengers who were screaming at the time he went off the edge of the cliff. Yeah.
And that is exactly the sort of dark humour you find on the flight deck all the time.
Oh, yes. Dark humour is very much, I think, in the aviation industry and in the forces. So imagine that you're going back to when you're 16 to 18. And I know you talk to audiences where there are younger people or people who do have children of that age. I know you mentioned, how old is your son now?
My son's 27. I've got two daughters who are 25 and 23 as well.
Okay. That's great. And I've got 3 daughters and a son who are all in the range of 29 to 32. So it's a fascinating stage. But just imagine you were even younger than them. You were sort of 16 to 18, and you went in your DeLorean back to the future, and you met the young Emma Henderson. Knowing all the things you've known and learning from all the experiences and the mistakes you made and the successes you've had and the books you've written and the speeches you've given and the people you've met, what would you say this matters and this doesn't, if you were to give the young Emma a bit of advice?
I would say get out of your own way and get over yourself. So, be braver would be the first thing, and stop being such a knob would be the second. I don't apologise for saying that because, I think I was very shy growing up, and it came out as being, I am still quite shy actually, but nobody believes me because I'm loud. You can be loud and shy. I'm very comfortable in this situation on TV, talking to a room of 500 people. I struggle a little bit I have to really force myself to do networking because I don't really think I'm interesting enough to do that. So I would just tell myself to be braver, but be a bit less cocky about the things that I knew I was good at. I was good at things when I was younger. I was that annoying kid who said I was going to do something and I did it. Oh. And, I was very lucky, which was why my command failure was such a massive punch in the face, because the first time I failed anything in my life, I was already in my 40s. I passed my driving test the first time, sailed through GCSEs, international baccalaureate degree, diploma in interior design. Anything I set my mind to, I achieved.
And that is a really good bit of advice, because you and I meet many leaders who are running big organizations, or their other leaders in their organization who've had nothing but this gilded path of success after success after success, with famous brands and famous universities and well-paying job and earning lots of money. And I'm always interested, what will happen when they have a failure? And sometimes it's catastrophic. I had one who was
Yeah.
the CEO of an actuarial practice. He'd had this gilded path. And then suddenly it all just fell apart, mentally and everything. And all he could do was sit at home, watch TV. The kids were playing around him. He couldn't even interact with the kids. He had a complete mental breakdown. And all he could do was walk people's dogs. That was the extent of limit of what happens. But there was stuff that he'd put into the rooms in his head that he didn't want to open those rooms. Don't go there. But now all the doors flew open and all the stuff came out. And so I think in some ways, I almost wish for people a bit of failure occasionally, because that's what you learn. I've learned the most from my failures. And as someone said, so you learned a lot from your failures? I said, yeah, I think I'm going to go and make a few more, because I keep learning so much from it.
I think it goes full circle, actually, Jonathan, back to what you asked me about at the beginning. Ask me about where I come from, where Emma Henderson comes from. And it's my parents who brought me up to understand that actually what you have doesn't matter, but what you are matters more than anything else. And my mum's wonderful, because she says to me, darling, we're not here to judge other people, we're here to love. And she says it exactly like that as well. She's a wonderful Granny Annie is everybody's favourite person.
I can understand why.
And they were just very there was just nothing that could have possibly happened in my world. It doesn't mean my parents wouldn't have been cross with me, and still would be cross with me if I turned up and told them I'd done something that they weren't really expecting. But they wouldn't stop loving me, and the world wouldn't stop turning. I was very, very, growing up, it was very, very clear to me that whatever was going on in my world, it wasn't going to stop turning because of it. So, and I think we do think that social media has made us all think that we are the most important person in the room all the time. And we're not. It's never about us. It's always about what we're doing to support other people and what impression we're leaving on the world. What difference are we making to the world? So when the ripple effect of everything we're doing and saying spreads out across the pond of our lives, is that a good ripple, or is it a tidal wave of destruction? We can choose that.
And isn't there that lovely saying, if you worry what people think about you, you'd be surprised how little they do. They're thinking about themselves. They're not thinking about you at all. No.
Exactly.
So on that topic, let's go a few of the topics around the Inspiring Leadership Compass, beginning with True North, which you talk about in your own way, about moral integrity, values, beliefs. You talk about your father as a minister and his working in Lloyd's, and mum with her. It's what you are, it's who you are, not what you have, the material things. What have you done? Because I know I've let myself down, and the values I was brought up by a mother who was Quaker mixed with Church of England, bringing us up because father, a fast jet pilot, was killed when I was 2.5. So she brought 3 boys up age 33 on her own, which I used to think was terribly old. But now my children are that age, and I'm going, if they were widowed now, goodness, quite a shock. And the other one, I just want to make the connection back to Frimley Park. My daughter Bryony was born at Frimley Park when I was at Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. And so it's very special to me. And now she just gave birth 8 months ago to her baby girl. And so Frimley Park has a special connection for us too. What did you learn when you let your values slip that you can pass on to others as a tip around moral integrity, moral quotient?
I think that it's important to remember that people aren't thinking about you as much as you think they are. So when things go wrong, because I have had a very charmed life, but of course it hasn't all been perfect. And don't tell if any of you meet my husband, don't tell him I've just admitted that I haven't been perfect for my whole life. That would be a huge defeat. My dad said something to me once that he said to me, it's not over until the fat lady's singing, and you just, if the fat lady starts warming up, just stop listening. But it's never what you think is the end of everything invariably isn't. And when I had my illness, he said to me, never let the thing that you're doing become more important than the reason that you're doing it in the first place. And I thought, oh, whatever, Dad, I don't know what you mean. But actually afterwards I thought, oh, that's really profound, you know. And I think it is really important. We tend to bury ourselves in thinking that we're the most, you know, if I have a day off EasyJet, the airline's going to grind to a halt. If my husband takes a day out of the Air Force, then suddenly war's going to break out. And I think we over egg our sense of how important we are in the world. And I think that, it's very easy to get carried away with that. And I think, when I've let things slip, I think probably the most relatable example really is with my children. I have not always handled my children well. And, we put our children went to boarding school to Gordonston down the road from where we live, which was a sacrifice that we made to make sure their education was continued. But it was also so that one of us could deploy to war zones and the other one could come home at 3:00 in the morning from Malaga every day, because that was our jobs, But it meant in the summer holidays, there was this intense period where suddenly we had like 2 teenage girls and me in the house. And, COVID, for example, wasn't fun because we were all not only in the house, but they wanted to be at university where they should have been getting drunk all the time. And they were at home with 2 of the most boring people on the planet.
What's that lovely saying? When I was 18, I couldn't believe how stupid my parents were. And now I'm 32. I'm amazed how much they've grown up in intervening years. And I love that sort of the words of wisdom from your parents, but also one that my mother used to say, which is everything will be all right in the end, and if it's not all right,
it's not the end. Absolutely. Absolutely that. And, I think that we keep going until we make it all right. And you wake up one morning and you realize that whatever the big troll was that you were carrying around with you on your shoulder thinking he was going to attack you all the time, suddenly that's not there anymore.
No.
And we place a lot of importance on meaningless detritus.
Yeah. And I think you need a few wake-up calls in life to realize what matters. The last 4 years have been quite a trying time, with my brother Graham getting attacked by another doctor. It's been in the news, and he tried to murder my family and burn the house down. He has been found guilty at last. 4 years of trying to avoid court cases. But Graham was 5% chance of living after he'd been stabbed through 4 vital organs. But I tell this because while he was recovering after he'd been in a coma for a week, an induced coma so he could live, he said to me, Jonathan, I will make it. I'll be okay. I'll be fine. He said, but David, our middle brother, he has metastatic cancer and he will die within the next 8 weeks. And he did. And he goes, so don't worry about me. I'll be fine, but it's David we need to look after. And so even as he was getting over a horrific attack by a psychopath, he was thinking about his dying brother. And that puts everything in perspective.
I think perspective is the key word there, isn't it? And, I think the biggest challenge that I faced as an adult was when my brother-in-law was kidnapped in South America and held hostage for 101 days.
Wow.
And we were in New Zealand at the time. And I just kept looking up at the sky at night thinking he can see the same stars. And, there's this unwavering belief that we would see him again. And I don't know where it came from. And we might have been wrong, but we weren't. And, that was the first time that I realised how little the things I thought were important meant, really, in the grand scheme of things. Because, at one point we thought we might have to sell our house to pay a ransom to get him back.
What had happened? What had happened, briefly? He
had gone to Bogota to stay with cousins, and they had said, you must go on this amazing trek to the lost city of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. And so he went off on this trek and he didn't come back. And 16 of them had gone, and they had gone up to the lost city, and then they'd come back. On their way back, they woke up in one of the rest stops with rifle butts in their faces. And 8 of them were released immediately, which is how the news broke. And the other 8 were marched off into the rainforest. And we didn't know who had him. We didn't know what they wanted. And gradually we discovered that it was a group called the ELN, the Spanish
Yeah, the
Liberation
airline.
Army,
Yeah.
that had them, not the FARC, which was a big thing because FARC would often demand a ransom and then kill the hostages anyway. ELN wanted they wanted publicity for their plight because they were living in squalor in a country that's run by drug lords and gun runners. And they said, our lives are rubbish. We don't have education. We don't have healthcare. We don't have access to clean water or food. And they took these hostages as a way of highlighting that. And they were released eventually in dribs and drabs. They were released. Mark and 4 Israelis were released on Christmas Eve 2003. And Mark, actually, my brother-in-law, went on to make a documentary about it called My Kidnapper, which is available somewhere. And it was really interesting because he kept a diary through that time, believing that he would survive and get out and be able to tell his story one day. And the writing got smaller and smaller and smaller as he ran out of paper in his notebook. And that was the first real challenge I had ever faced I was 30. And that was the first really big challenge I'd ever faced. I'd never, I'd lost grandparents, but they were old and it was very sad, but it was the circle of life, But this was a big challenge. And then when 2020 came along, and I was in my first year of flying, my brother had a motorbike accident in New Zealand, which left him paralysed from the waist down. But he was in a coma for weeks. He broke every bone in his body and only just survived. And he's my only sibling. And then, my husband was diagnosed with diabetes, which we thought was going to mean he'd been medically discharged and we would lose the house. And then there was another cousin who had a car accident on the way home from a wedding. And it was just like the year that kept on giving, because towards the end of the year, I woke up one night to smell smoke in my mum and dad's house, and the house was on fire. Fortunately, it was saved, but we were out of it for weeks and weeks as it was repaired. And then to cap the year off, the government scrapped the Nimrod and closed Kinloss and sent us south to live in Buckinghamshire just after we put our children into boarding school and said, don't worry, darling, mummy and daddy will still be here for years yet. And, and it was just a really, really challenging year. And it taught me so much about what really matters in life, because actually what mattered was that we saw Jim's brother again. Mark mattered more than anything else. My brother living mattered more than anything else. My husband's surviving his illness and living with it was a huge game changer for us, but it mattered more. He mattered as a person more than anything else. And I think that brings us nicely back really to my North compass point of humanity, because people matter more than anything in our lives. I don't care what car you've got in the driveway, how many of them you've got. I don't care how much money is in your bank account. And this is actually not about faith, although I do attribute that to, I think, a lot of where this comes from. This is just about who I am and how I want to be remembered.
Beautifully put. And it also brings up the other topic I wanted to talk with you is about health quotient, health HQ. And our health is one of those things in many ways you can do something about the environment, but much of it you can't control. You didn't know you were going to get an autoimmune disease.
No.
Your husband didn't know he was going to get diabetes. Your brother didn't know he was going to, and he had the accident, but he didn't know he was going to be paralyzed by it. And so what is your advice to people listening about mental health and physical health? What do you do, for example, to keep healthy? And what do you recommend to others?
So two things really. Don't take your health for granted. I mean, as an airline pilot, you have a medical every year. So you kind of get a heads up on things that might be coming your way. But if you passed your medical every year, it doesn't actually mean that you're never going to get sick. I had passed my medical in the January before I got this illness, and yet I nearly died 8 months later. So, and at the time I was running every day. I was playing tennis every day. Even when I was flying, I would always find time for a run, and I'd play tennis most days as well. It was kind of exercise was my life. I was swimming 1 kilometre regularly. Wow. I was out with the dogs walking all the time. We ate pretty healthily. And there was no reason really for me to get struck down with something like that any more than there is when somebody gets cancer or something. We don't know. So, don't take your health for granted. There are things we can control and things that we can't. So I think in terms of physical health, do what you can. And I'm training for Kilimanjaro at the moment. I'm training for the Edinburgh Half Marathon. I'm running when I can. I eat sensibly. I've actually given up drinking. So my
Me
husband
too. Me too. Well done.
first in the world, but yeah. Don't miss it, and it makes me feel better. So so look after what you've been given. But I think when it comes to mental health, those of us who are in positions where we're kind of seen as being a success, you're an airline captain, your mental health must be great. It's actually okay to step back sometimes and say, do you know what? It's not. I'm not actually feeling okay at the moment. That's not an admission of failure. That's a sign of strength to say, do you know what? This thing, that whatever it is that's going on, it might be a thing. It might be an event that's happened. It might be, as happened to me in 2020, menopause didn't really creep up on me. It slapped me in the face like a wet kipper and coincided nicely with COVID lockdown. So I was just like an injured bear for quite a lot of lockdown, it wasn't nice for my family. And I realized actually that my mental health was poor because I was struggling and thinking, well, what is going to become of us as pilots? What's going to become of us as people? Everything that I have, Captain Emma, where is Captain Emma going to fit into this new world order? And it was bad for my mental health. But, that's partly why I wrote Grounded, because my family have always kept me grounded. And in the end, I think my mental health has always been measured by how important is this really. And I've very, very comfortably gone for counselling. Even last January, something wasn't right. And I thought, you know what, I shouldn't be. We lost a very good friend, who's a Harrier pilot, actually. He was in our Guard of Honour. He died in a plane crash in Italy 3 years ago.
I'm so sorry.
Funnily enough, on the same day so the 5-year anniversary of my last flight is March the 16th, 2020. And he died on March the 16th, 2022. Wow. And it was horrible. We didn't get a chance to say goodbye. He was just taken from all of us. And I woke up one morning and I was thinking about him and I cried inconsolably for 3 hours. And I thought, it's sad, but it's not crying incontrollably for 3 hours sad. And that's when I knew I had to go and get some help. So, I'm menopausal, so I adjusted my HRT, but I went and got some counselling. I went and spoke to somebody that wasn't in my family. And I think it's really important that we get over ourselves with that. It's not a sign of weakness, asking for help and then choosing to accept. We're very good at offering help. We need to be willing to accept it. And I think that's the main point, really.
I really love the fact you shared that. And I was thinking of the interview with Jason Fox, the big bear of a TV personality and Who Dares Wins, Special Boat Squadron. And he and I talked about our mental health challenges on his podcast. And I recommend people go and listen to him. Because I always admire people who are strong enough to be vulnerable, particularly over challenges to mental health. I've also had cognitive behavioral therapy and found it very helpful. But a lot of people don't go for that third phrase I said of the 10 words, I need some help.
Yeah.
They go, I'm bomb-proof. No, you're not. You're not bomb-proof. And it takes a special man or woman to go, I need some help. And actually, as a leader, the best thing you can say to somebody who's working for you is, I need you. I need you. I value you. I need you. I need what you can bring because I can't do it all myself.
I would add to that. Sorry to interrupt.
No.
Somebody who's working for you, yes. But do you know who the most important person is that you can say that to in your life ever? Is your partner. I think we take it for granted. And I think as you get older as well, we sometimes are guilty of taking each other for granted. And I think the most important thing, my husband knows I love him. He knows that I don't like him sometimes because I shout at him when I don't like him. But for him to know that I actually need him, he's not just here because he's nice to have around. I need him in my life. He's part of my life. And we don't tell each other. I think we don't often tell each other that.
Yeah, and having got it wrong in the early part of my life, now I do happen to be divorced after 23 years, and Lee and I have been married for 10 years, and I'm not intending ever to get married again to anybody else. This is the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. But I've learned through my mistakes, and I do make every day, I tell Lee how much I love her. I love her unconditionally. There's no conditions on it. I love her if she does this or does that, which is how I think I was when I got it wrong in the past. It was conditional love, and that's not the way to be with anybody, particularly your family. So yeah, I really appreciate the fact you say that, because particularly male thing, they used to joke about it in the army. Oh, told my wife I loved her 30 years ago when I married her. Didn't need to tell her that again, do I? I go, oh, really? That kind of toxic masculinity? Genuinely? It's not funny anymore. Before we go on to your top tip in a minute, what would be a final thing that you'd like to share with people as they listen around the world to you, Emma? Any tips on leadership? Before we go on to your top tip, but just any message you want to get across, really, from your grounded book and your grounded leadership?
I think that the biggest thing that we can do as leaders is to show up for people. And I mean, it leads nicely really into my top tip, but, remember as a leader that you're leading people. If you've got no people to follow you and no people who are looking to you for support or looking to you for ideas, you're not a leader, because there's nobody there to follow you. Yeah. So, if those people have moved away from listening to you or from doing the things you want them to do or the things that you're paying them to do even, it's easy to point the finger, isn't it, and say, well, you're not doing this. And I think it's really worth remembering that there are three fingers pointing back at you in that case. No, and that's it, is remember people are people.
Yeah, really good advice. And too many misleaders these days, or rather than inspiring leaders, we have expiring leaders. They have lots of followers and people blindly follow them. And it's almost like the new religion, the cult of authoritarian. Just do whatever he says. It must be sensible. I must drink bleach. I'm going to drink bleach. It's going to help my COVID. Whatever it might be. There's some pretty dangerous people, misleaders out there. Emma, it's now time for you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little about what you've done in the past, or what you're doing now, and leave us with your top tip, please.
I am Captain Emma Henderson MBE is my official title. I am one of fewer than 500 female airline captains in the world, although that number may have grown slightly, but that still makes me rarer than a giant panda. For 12 years I flew for EasyJet, and in the pandemic I set up a charity called Project Wingman, which provided wellbeing support to frontline NHS staff across the UK. 6,500 people got involved with that. That's what earned me the MBE, and that's really what created my career pivot into professional speaking. And I now give keynotes at conferences, mostly all around the country and all around the world, about leadership, decision-making, and how to build resilient, high-performing teams.
Well, it's been Captain Emma Henderson, MBE. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. I just want to acknowledge your authenticity and the vulnerability you showed through the strength you have. It was absolute joy having you on. So thank you.
My pleasure. And my top tip would be just remember to show up for people in the way that you would expect them to show up for you all of the time, even when no one's watching. That's my leadership tip.
It's a great tip.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's been a real pleasure getting to know you a bit, and just lovely to talk to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Emma. Look forward to seeing you again.
Likewise.